I have been a paranormal investigator now for over 15 years. Most of my clients hire me to investigate possible hauntings or strange disappearances, things of that nature. But every once in a while I go out on my own and look into strange and mysterious events that I hear about on my own. One day I will be publishing a book about all my findings, and undoubtedly the story I'm about to tell you will be in the book. For this reason, I don't want to divulge the exact location where this took place, except to say that it's in a rural part of England. I arrived there in the late afternoon as the sun was beginning to set. I knelt down, examining the peculiar set of animal footprints on the soft ground. The imprints looked strange, a mix between the hooves of a sheep and the feet of a human, with added little claw marks. And these things were deep, suggesting whatever made them was about as heavy as a person, maybe even more. I glanced back at the local farmer, a thin and weary-looking man, who was standing a bit away. "These footprints, they're consistent with the ones you found previously?" I asked him. His tired eyes met mine, and he slowly nodded. "Aye." Looking around, I could see the farmstead in the distance, and nearby, a flock of sheep huddled together. But what made my stomach churn was the gruesome sight on my right, a sheep mangled so badly. It was barely recognizable. I've been researching unidentified creatures and mysterious phenomena for years, but this was unsettling. "So, this is the third time something like this has happened?" I inquired, looking for patterns. "Aye," the farmer affirmed. "The area has been buzzing with whispers of a mysterious creature for a while now. Colleagues of mine mentioned it in passing, but when I heard a farmer saw a creature taller than a human with a ghastly face and lethal claws, I knew I had to see for myself. Most times these things end up being hoaxes, but this felt different." "I'll look around a bit more," I told the farmer, surveying the field stretching out to the woods. He nodded, then headed back to his farmstead, his loyal dog trailing behind him. Every victim of this supposed creature had a farm bordering the forest, implying the creature might be residing there. Even though dusk was approaching, and there was an unnerving feeling in the air, my trusted rifle on my back gave me some confidence. Before I ventured out, the innkeeper from the village had spun wild tales about the creature. Some details varied, but there was always a commonality: strange footprints, dead animals, mostly sheep but also pigs and chickens. Regardless of the authenticity, I thought, it'd make for a thrilling write-up or a chapter in my book. The woods looked bleak, with thin, almost sick-looking trees. I treaded carefully, scanning the ground for any signs of the creature. But as I ventured deeper and darkness began to envelop the woods, I considered heading back. Just then, something caught my eye. A white face, almost like an animal's skull, peeking through the trees. Heart racing, I slowly aimed my rifle at the figure, but out of nowhere, a blinding pain hit me and everything went dark. When I came to, my head was throbbing, and I could hear voices. Pushing through the pain, I tried to see who was in the room with me. It was then that I saw the familiar face of the innkeeper who was on the phone. Upon seeing me awake, he quickly hung up and came over to ask me how I was feeling. I told him, not great, and asked him how I got back to the inn, and he told me that he found me passed out in the woods with a bad gash on my head, and that he and a couple of locals carried me back. He also informed me that he called a doctor, and that I should continue to rest until he was able to examine my injuries, and then he left to take care of some of the guests who were checking in. Now feeling fairly lucid, I began to think about what could have happened to me out there. I began to get very suspicious. The innkeeper's story made no sense. So I got up from the bed and started looking around the room for my rifle and my other things. When I opened the closet, I couldn't believe what I saw. Hanging up in there, just like a well-pressed suit, was a costume made from animal fur, and it looked exactly like the creature that I took aim at earlier that night. It suddenly occurred to me that this creature story was all a ruse, probably to bring attention and tourism down to this area, and I had no idea just how far these people would go to keep their little secret. But if the bump on my head was any indication, my life was in danger. I laid back in bed and waited for the doctor, who finally showed up, He checked me out, gave me an ice pack and some painkillers, and told me to get some rest. The next day I packed up to leave, and as I checked out, the innkeeper questioned me to make sure that I'd be writing a story about what I had witnessed out there in the tree line that night. I assured him that he'd be reading about it soon enough, and that I was sure he would find my story very interesting. In the city where I live, there's an old water tower perched atop a hill near one of the parks. This rusting, towering structure has been dormant for over half a century. Allow me to paint a picture of it. It's a cylindrical Colosseum-like structure adorned with numerous alcoves and archways along its perimeter. A protective fence encircles the entire structure, and an abundance of no trespassing signs serve as a warning to would-be trespassers. Although the structure was forgotten, electricity still flows to the site, as evidenced by the lights that illuminate the tower at night. However, due to the dense growth of tall trees surrounding the area, the building remains mostly concealed from view. I had always been fascinated with this enigmatic structure, and heard that there is a small round hole somewhere in the structure that's just big enough for a person to squeeze through, and once inside, if you yell really loud, the echoes in the place apparently go on forever as your voice energy circles the inside of the metal cylindrical perimeter. Also, if someone standing far away on the opposite side whispers against the curved metal walls, a person who has their ear against it can hear it as if that person was whispering directly into their ear. I often mentioned it to my parents when I was only 11 or so, hoping that if I expressed my curiosity enthusiastically enough, they would offer their permission for me to go and check it out, as a science experiment kind of thing. But of course, that never happened, and I'm sure it's not a surprise to anyone, but they cautioned me against it, emphasizing that it was private property and strictly off-limits, not to mention dangerous, due to its state of disrepair. Well, as the years went on, and I got a little older, that fateful night finally arrived. I was 15 years old at that point, and was talking to my friend Juan at school that day about that tower, and we convinced ourselves that we had to check it out. We made a plan to go up there that night. Our mind was made up and nothing was going to stop us. We would venture to the water tower, breach the fence, and explore the property. I must make it clear that I do not endorse or condone such behavior. What I did that night was not only wrong but illegal, and by the end of this story, you'll understand why I say this with unwavering conviction. It was a nondescript midweek evening, perhaps a Wednesday or Thursday, days of the week that made little difference to me. All I know is that we had school that day, and it couldn't have been a Friday, because I remember thinking that there wouldn't be any teenagers partying at that spot on that particular night. To make sure that my parents didn't worry, I had told them that I was going to a friend's birthday party, and that I may be home a little later than normal. I met Juan around 8 p.m., and we set out for our little adventure. We got a bite to eat, and visited a couple of friends before finally heading up to the tower. We arrived around 10 o'clock, and, without hesitation, we scaled the fence. My initial impressions were somewhat underwhelming. I'm not sure what I had anticipated, but the reality didn't quite match my expectations. The lighting was subpar, consisting of old, dim, and yellow or amber lights, with a few of them flickering ominously. The dimness created plenty of shadows, which we quickly realized could be in our favor if we needed to lay low and out of sight in case someone patrolled the area for any trespassers. We hadn't brought a flashlight, but we figured our cell phones would work just fine since the area did have some lights, and we would be able to see where we were going pretty much the entire way. As we wandered through the shadows, we became aware of voices in the distance. My initial thought was that they belonged to teenagers hanging out and doing some underage drinking, but something about the voices didn't fit the bill. They were deeper, sounded older, and carried a gravelly tone. These voices didn't belong to partying high schoolers, they belonged to adults, perhaps middle-aged individuals. We should have taken this as a cue to leave, but curiosity propelled us forward, and I don't think either one of us was willing to be the guy who proposed turning back for risking looking like a coward. We stealthily made our way toward the source of the voices, and within moments, we were able to make out 4 figures standing about 40 feet from us, well within the fence line. Although we couldn't discern their conversation due to their hushed tones, we caught certain words and sentences that made me scared for my life. Words like money and "where is the stuff?" It soon became evident that we had stumbled upon a drug deal. I watched in disbelief as cash changed hands and items in bags were exchanged. We looked at each other, and without saying a word, we both understood what we had to do. Slowly and cautiously, we retraced our steps, staying hidden in the shadows and trying not to step on a loud twig or kick any empty beer cans. We reached a point where we felt safe enough to jump the fence and make our escape. However, fate had other plans. As I scaled the fence this time, my shoelace got snagged, and I tumbled to the ground, causing the entire fence to shake. Suddenly, I heard angry shouts behind me. The chase was on, and I heard the sound of running footsteps coming my way. We heard the men shout at each other something along the line of, "Don't let them get away." We both sprinted for our lives and made our way to our bikes. My entire body was overtaken by fear, and I could hardly keep my shaking feet on the pedals. Juan was a faster rider than me, and was way ahead of me in no time. Luckily, most of the way back was downhill, and at some point I was going so fast that my pedaling wasn't even keeping up with my spinning wheels. By the time I got to the bottom, I was now able to see Juan, who was still pedaling like a kid possessed. I don't think either one of us ever looked back, and we both managed to make it back to my house before collapsing in my backyard. It took us a full 15 minutes or so before we were able to catch our breath and say anything to each other. When we did, we didn't say much because we were interrupted by my parents, who apparently heard us arrive and were waiting for us to come into the house. They eventually came out to check on us. By then we were fairly calm and didn't say anything about the incident to my parents. Juan gave me a fist bump and took off for home. The next day at school, we finally got a chance to talk about everything, and we both decided not to tell anyone about what had happened. In fact, we promised each other for fear that someone we told may tell someone else who may have some connection to those men and reveal our identity. Even now that it's been over a decade since the incident, I still think about that night and wonder what would have happened to us had those men caught up to us. At 15 years old, I felt indestructible, but after that night, I definitely reevaluated my life and the risks that I would take going forward. So, to anyone tempted by urban exploration or similar activities, especially on private property, I implore you to think twice before you consider venturing into the unknown, for the consequences may be far more severe than you can ever imagine.